Speciation. Speciation is the formation of a new species from an existing species, and they become separated, different species. What's meaning of a species or a species? It is a group of organisms that can interbreed successfully and they can produce fertile offspring. What's meaning of fertile offspring? Their offspring can reproduce. Why speciation happens? Why members of a species become different species? Members of a species can't interbreed anymore. So they become another species because we have here a condition to say this group is a species or species. They can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. If they can't interbreed anymore, they are going to be different species. When members of a species can't reproduce or can't interbreed anymore, it is called reproductive isolation because members of different populations can't mate successfully and they become separate species. Members can't mate or can't interbreed successfully, they will become separate species. This is called reproductive isolation, and it happens between isolated populations. What factors force the members of a species to be isolated or to be reproductive isolated and they can't interbreed anymore? Number one, behavioral barriers. It is called behavioral isolation. Behavior isolation because of difference in courtships or mating behaviors. What's the meaning of courtships? Like dances of birds or songs of frogs or chemical scents, they all are sexual signals. These sexual signals are not favored anymore by females. Number two, geographic barriers can cause isolation. It is called allopatric speciation. Geographic isolation, it happens when physical barriers like rivers or mountains or canyons divide population and they can't meet anymore. They are isolated because of physical barriers. Number three, temporal barriers can cause isolation. Temporal barriers. What's the meaning of temporal? Temporal here, it means timing. Timing of reproductive periods prevents mating. For example, two species of trees that have different pollination periods will be separated over time. Because they have different pollination periods, will be separated over time.
Isolations leads to speciation. For an example of isolation, geographic isolation. It is a physical separation of members of a population. Populations used to live together. Individuals used to live together. But because of geographic isolation, they are become separated and they do not interbreed anymore. So they became different species. For example, for geographic isolation, canyon. formation of canyon or valley between populations. Because of geographic isolation, speciation happens. This kind of speciation is called allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. It is caused by geographic isolation.
There are two types of reproductive isolation: pre-zygotic isolation and post-zygotic isolation. What's the meaning of zygotic here? It means formation of zygote after fertilization. Pre-zygotic means no fertilization happened because male and female did not mate because of different mating calls, behaviors, or different mating times. The second type, post-zygotic isolation. They have already mated, but their offspring have poor or incomplete development, or they got offspring hybrid, infertile, because different species mate, like tiger with lion, different species, they produce liger. Liger is hybrid, can't reproduce. And mule here resulted from donkey and horse, different species. Mule can't reproduce. Or young die early. Their offspring can't survive. Sympatric speciation, when a population is divided into two populations, two different species, because they can't interbreed anymore. And it happens in the same geographic area. While allopatric speciation, a population separated into two populations, it means two species because of geographic isolation.
Rates of speciation. It means speciation happens at different rates, maybe gradually or bursts. Gradually or at a regular rate. It is called gradualism. The fossil record indicates long periods of many species without much change. Change happens after long periods, while punctuated equilibrium means speciation happens in bursts. Bursts means suddenly explosion in variation relative to geologic time. It means in short periods. In short periods, speciation happens. The fossil record indicates great diversity of new forms occurred in a few thousand years. Suddenly or bursts means punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium.